made another announcement.
There's only one way to stop the killing. That is to keep the weapons of war out of the hands of the international outlaws of North Vietnam. In full coordination with the Republic of Vietnam, I have ordered the following measures, which are being implemented as I am speaking to you. All entrances to North Vietnamese ports will be mined to prevent access to these ports and North Vietnamese naval operations from these ports. United States forces have been directed to take appropriate measures within the internal and claimed territorial waters of North Vietnam to interdict the delivery of any supplies. Rail and all other communications will be cut off to the maximum extent possible. Air and naval strikes against military targets in North Vietnam will continue.
Throughout the summer, heavy bombing continued, including some raids in which the crews did not wait to be fired on first, a violation of the Pentagon's rules of war. The bombing missions, directed by Air Force General John Lavelle, became the subject of a Senate investigation in September. And according to Senator John Stennis, the picture was one of confusion.
They testified about the strikes, the briefings for those strikes. They both said that plans were made sometimes 2 days in advance, and the plans were made with expectations of being fired on. And former Lieutenant Groper's testimony and substance was that they would unload their bombs whether they met this hostile reaction or not. Lieutenant Moore's testimony was in substance that the strikes were planned in advance, that hostile action was expected, but that the intelligence officer said that if you do not meet the hostile reaction, you will not release your bombs. Now that is a brief substance of the testimony of each one of them. There's a difference in that testimony.
Also during September, the Paris talks finally reached what the president called a sensitive stage. There were headlines about a ceasefire, a coalition government to include the Viet Cong, an American withdrawal, and the immediate return of prisoners. On October 26th, Henry Kissinger announced that peace was at hand.
Most of the most difficult problems have been dealt with. That we have to say that both sides have approached this problem with a long-term point of view, with the attitude that we want to have not an armistice, but peace. And it is this attitude which will govern our actions despite occasional ups and downs, which are inevitable.
A major stumbling block was President Thieu's refusal to accept the terms, and Hanoi's deadline for signing just a week before election was not fulfilled. Sergeant Shriver voiced the bitter mood of many Americans who felt the credibility gap was widening one more time.
He dilly-dallied around for 4 years while 20,000 people were killed in Vietnam and hundreds of thousands wounded, and at the last minute, like Tom Thumb, he pulls out a plum and says, "Look what a bright boy am I." Listen up. The fact is, and we've said it for a long time, that the peace which has been, or let me say the ceasefire, because we do not have a peace. The prospect of a ceasefire, which is all that's there. It's not peace, it's just the prospect of a ceasefire. That could have been negotiated 4 years ago when Nixon first came to office.
But as Thanksgiving approached, negotiations continued optimistically at the highest levels. Busing was a big issue in 1972, but one that was never resolved. Ecology, welfare, crime, drugs, taxes, they were all with us. So was economy, or lack of it. In 1971, the president had set up a wage and price control board with labor and business both represented. But in 1972, on March 22nd, labor resigned. Again, George Meany.
It is our duty now to report to the membership of the trade union movement and the American public that we have no hope for fairness, equity, or justice in the pay board. The board is not tripartite. It is not independent and autonomous. The pay board represents government control. It represents political and business interests.
Said the president.
When I announced our new economic policy on August 15 of last year, I said that fighting inflation must be everybody's job. Yesterday, George Meany walked off the job. The decision to walk out came after the ruling on the longshoremen's contract. While other American workers are being held to a 5.5% wage increase, the pay board ruled against a 20% wage increase for the longshoremen. Mr. Meany supported the increase. The pay board was right. Mr. Meany was wrong.
When the question arose of a rise in auto prices in September, Ralph Nader took the stand before a congressional hearing.
On the social balance sheet, which the automakers conveniently forget to include, they're all greatly in debt to the public for years of neglect in safety and pollution control. This debt, which has created profits of billions of dollars over the years, has been ignored by the companies as they seek to require the federal government to shoulder the blame for the price increases which they are now seeking. It's grossly unfair for the auto companies to ask consumers, whose wages are tightly controlled, to pay higher prices for features that the companies demonstrably could have and should have put into effect many years ago. Certainly their exuberant portrayal of their autos, using such terms as rugged, etc., in their promotions, would have led to the expectation by consumers that such features should have been installed.
Campaign financing was an issue of the year. So was limiting the national debt. The ceiling was fixed by Congress at $250 billion, but the ceiling proved to be elastic, prompting this from George McGovern.
In a full employment economy, public revenues should equal public expenditures, but largely because they did not even seek a full employment economy. Republican leadership since 1969 has now run up an accumulated deficit of $80 billion. That just happens to be 1/5 of the entire national debt accumulated ever since the days of George Washington. What do you think they would say about Democrats if we had that kind of a miserable record of fiscal and economic mismanagement?
As Christmas approached, Americans seemed to doubt that wages and prices would ever get together. 1972 seemed to have one unique pattern: the sudden disclosure of sensational secrets. Secret negotiations, agreements, and bombings all came to light. In March, we learned about a secret promise by a corporate giant, International Telephone and Telegraph, of a $400,000 gift to the city of San Diego, then a possible host for the Republican convention. In exchange, the government was supposed to give ITT relief in a complex antitrust action. Washington columnist Jack Anderson broke the story.
Here you had an ITT case settled, the biggest antitrust case in our time. It was settled simultaneously with not a burnt offering, but a cash offering by the same ITT to the Republican convention. Now, if they don't understand that that's wrong, then something's wrong with the Senate. I hope they understand that's wrong.
The facts were contained in a confidential memo allegedly written by an ITT lobbyist, Mrs. Dita Beard, who collapsed under intense questioning and was rushed to a Denver hospital. Amid much confusion and corporate double talk, ITT fed that and many other memos into the paper shredder, and president of the company, Harold Janine, was summoned before a Senate subcommittee.
I have never seen the memorandum. I don't know anybody in our company that received it. I don't know whether it's genuine. I don't know whether she wrote it or what it represents. And I hope that she can testify as rapidly as possible to clear up these facts.
A key figure in the supposed deal was Richard Kleindienst, then awaiting confirmation of his appointment as Attorney General. John Mitchell, who had resigned the post in February, defended him.
Observing these hearings and having testified in them, I would point out that there is not one bit of evidence or reason why the Senate should not proceed with the confirmation of Mr. Kleindienst as the Attorney General of the United States. It is certainly in the public interest that it be done now and be done as rapidly as possible.
Kleindienst's appointment was confirmed. Dita Beard did not testify, and the whole affair was soon overshadowed by yet another scandal, which Republicans called a caper and Democrats called a conspiracy. On June 17th, 5 men with electronic bugging equipment were arrested in a pre-dawn raid in the Democratic National Committee offices in a Washington apartment building known as the Watergate. 2 more Republican aides were arrested shortly afterwards. Lawrence O'Brien, then DNC chairman, accused the top echelons of the Republican Party of espionage.
I would say that there must be the clearest evidence possible of gutter politics in this one single incident, which I consider to be extremely serious and going to the very heart of our political system. Clearly, there's an identification of this group with the committee to re-elect the president. That is certainly clear, and we don't have to go to court to make that determination.